Willow.com presents Journey Through the Night, Volume 1, Into the Darkness. Written by Anne de Vries. Narrated by Craig Roberts. Chapter 1. When John opened his eyes that sunny Friday morning in May, a thrush was singing by his window. It sang with such persistence and passion that it seemed to be speaking directly to him, and it seemed to have something very important to say. He swung his legs out of bed and, putting his arms on the sill, leaned out of the window. But then the singing thrush dropped from his branch and, screeching loudly, disappeared into the orchard. "She's not used to people living in the house yet," thought John. He yawned, rubbed his eyes, and looked across the fields. The sun stood just above the pines, but here and there slender wisps of fog still hung above the ditches that crossed the meadow. The next-door neighbor was already plowing, and steam was rising from the newly turned furrows. Standing together on the road were 3 farmers. One seemed to be doing all the talking. He had quite a story to tell. He pointed to the sky, waved his arms about, and pounded his fist in the palm of his hand. In the quiet morning air his excited voice carried all the way to John's window, but the words were garbled. "Those farmers get excited over nothing," thought John. "I wonder what happened to get him so steamed up. Maybe his cow had a 2-headed calf." It sure was beautiful out here in the country. They had moved here from the town of Zeist 3 days ago, and he was very happy with the move. How busy those 3 days had been. Everybody had pitched in to put the house in order. He, Mother, Father, Tricia, his 14-year-old sister, and Margie, a girl from the neighborhood. They had worked very late last night. At 11 o'clock he had staggered upstairs, deeply tired, but Mother and Father had still been busy. No wonder they were still sleeping. "I know what," he thought. "I'll surprise them. I'll fix them a nice cup of tea and serve them in bed." Jumping up to go wash himself, he almost tripped over a stack of books. He splashed a little water on himself and hurriedly pulled on his clothes. As he dressed, he studied his new room and planned where to put everything. When the books were in the bookcase and the Frisian landscape was hanging on the wall, the room would look real homey. The corner beside the bed would be a good spot to hang his air rifle. Beside it, at a slight angle, he would put his Indonesian spear, and his judo emblem would go right between them. It was his prized possession. He wasn't even 16 yet, and he had already come a long way in the sport. None of the boys in his class could escape his holds. If only he could keep up his lessons in one of the nearby towns. He had to keep practicing. But now, the tea. Quietly he glided down the stairs into the kitchen and put on the water. Less than 15 minutes later he entered his parents' bedroom, carrying a tray with 4 cups of tea and several pieces of rusk. Mother and Father were still fast asleep, although the sun was almost shining in their eyes. They looked good together. Mother looked like a girl with her soft skin and rosy cheeks, and with his mussed-up hair, Father looked very boyish. John put down his tray and tried to wake them. Because they had worked late, they were hard to rouse. Mother opened her eyes first and looked around as if she were lost. Then she laughed. "Whew," she said. "I was in the middle of a dream. What time is it?" "You have only to listen, Your Highness, and you'll hear the whistle from the creamery," said John, bowing deeply, "which means it's exactly 7 o'clock. He perched on the foot of the bed with his own cup of tea. "Shouldn't you call Tricia first?" asked Mother. "She's already sitting in bed drinking her tea," answered John. "She was a lot easier to wake up than you two. I only knocked once, and she popped right up. How do you like it? Don't I brew a great cup of tea?" They praised his tea-brewing skills enthusiastically, "But," added Father, "you didn't put enough sugar in mine." It was hard to put too much sugar in his tea. He had a sweet tooth. "What were you dreaming about, Mother?" Father asked. "It must have been some dream. You were hollering, 'No, no, no,' and you almost kicked me out of bed." Mother laughed.
"First tell me, where in the Bible does it say, 'If someone would kill thee, do not defend thyself, for the unrighteous man will kill his own soul'? I woke up with this text in mind. Isn't that strange?"
"Yes, it sure is," said Father, "particularly because there's no such text in the Bible. 'If someone would kill thee, do not defend thyself?' That would be a text to tickle the pacifists. Johnny boy, that mother of yours sure wakes up with weighty matters on her mind."
"It must be because I slept so deeply," said Mother, fishing for excuses. "Today we won't have to work so late. We got quite a bit done yesterday. Here's my cup, John. Now, make yourself scarce."
"I'm going for a walk in the woods," said John.
"It's beautiful outside. Just listen to the birds."
"Wait for me," said Father. He jumped out of bed, slid into his slippers, and grabbed his housecoat.
"Surely you're not going out like that?" asked Mother.
"Why not? That's the nice thing about living in the country. You can go out dressed like this without offending anybody." He washed, brushed his teeth, pulled a comb through his hair, and was ready to go. Together they strolled along the path through the orchard. The pear trees were in full bloom, and the apple trees were beginning to turn pink. Bees buzzed everywhere. John had just let Nemo, their dog, out of the shed. He dashed ahead and then came barreling back and rolled around in the wet grass. Out of sheer joy he snapped at the pant legs of Father's pajamas. Father stopped and looked back. John understood. He was just admiring the house that he had designed and built out here in the country. He had reason to be proud. The low white house with its thatched roof lay beautifully concealed between the trees, blending naturally with the landscape and the neighboring farmhouses. John's father was an architect, and the house was the fulfillment of a dream. He had come back to live where he had been born, among the farmers with whom he had grown up. Now he could devote himself completely to his favorite work, designing country homes in the old Saxon style with modern interiors. The chill of night still lingered under the dense sprawl of the trees. As they emerged from the orchard, the sun felt wonderfully warm on their skin. At the end of the windbreak that divided the heath from the pasture, they came upon a small lane and stopped again to look over the fields. As Father came from behind the windbreak, his eyebrows lifted. "Amazing," he muttered. "That's amazing. Look, John, it's Harm Barrelts and Fred Bauman, walking together. They live right next door to each other, but there's a feud between the two families. They haven't talked to each other in 15 years. And there they come, walking together like best of friends. I wonder what happened." The two farmers slowly drew closer. Each led a couple of cows on a rope. They were deeply engrossed in conversation with each other and glanced up at the sky every so often. They started visibly when they suddenly came face to face with John and his father, probably because the latter was a strange sight in his housecoat. "Bah!" one of them exclaimed. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" He clenched both hands on his walking stick. "Ha, ha, ha," laughed Father. "What a friendly welcome, Fred. Don't you know your old classmate any more? Everett de Boer? We just moved here a few days ago." "Everett! It is Everett," said the other, reaching for Father's hand. "Man, is that you? You're sure changed. And this is your son? He's almost a man already. I took you both for Germans." "Go on," said Father, laughing. "You're joking. Germans? Why Germans?" "Well, why not?" said Hiram Barrels while he shook hands with them. "Not impossible, is it, now that we're at war?" The laughter died on Father's lips. "At war?" he repeated slowly. "Yes, haven't you heard?" said Harm. "Didn't you hear all those planes? They passed over in swarms early this morning with the first light. Huge black airplanes heading west. And didn't you hear the explosions? That was our soldiers blowing up the bridges. But it probably won't do much good. The Germans will be here in a couple of hours. That's why we're taking our cows home. You never know what might happen." "Lord help us," exclaimed Father. This, more than anything else, frightened John. He had never heard Father speak like that before. The winding path must have seemed too long for him. He made a beeline for home, crashing straight ahead through the undergrowth. John followed right at his heels. A brown creature darted away underfoot. "A fox," thought John, but his mind hardly registered what a rare discovery this was. Panting, they reached the house and burst into the kitchen. "The radio," gasped Father. He rushed into the living room to turn it on. "You listen for the news while I go tell Mother what's happening. My boy, it's terrible. Those miserable traitors. That wicked Hitler." Still breathing hard, John sat by the radio. It was the same station where they'd heard the news last night. There hadn't been a black cloud anywhere on the horizon then. Lately, the thought of war had almost disappeared from his mind. Hadn't Hitler recently promised again that he would always respect the neutrality of Holland? The radio hummed and crackled. Then came a voice, clear female tones filled with outrage. The Queen. John quickly turned up the volume so that the voice could be heard all through the house. "I hereby raise a flaming word of protest against this unprecedented violation of all that is right and decent among civilized nations. My government and I will do our duty. You do yours, everywhere and in all circumstances, everyone at his assigned post with the utmost vigilance and with the inner assurance and resolve of a clear conscience." While the Queen was still speaking, the others quietly entered the room. "She really laid it on the line," said Father. "They haven't licked us yet. Just wait and see. Morale is high among our troops. They'll fight. They'll fight hard." Then he jumped to attention as the national anthem was playing on the radio. They sang along. Never before had John been so moved at the singing of that old, well-known song. He looked at his mother. She was pale and had tears in her eyes. But she sang bravely. As they sang, John took her hand in his. They wouldn't dare hurt his mother, he thought. He drew himself up as tall as he could and felt ready to do brave and dangerous deeds. He would protect his mother, even if he had to. "That was beautiful," said Father when the broadcast was over. The singing had done him a lot of good, too. He didn't look so pale anymore, and he wasn't as tense. He almost looked happy. Or was he just putting on a good front? "Chins up," he said. "Crying and complaining won't do any good. Let's plan our strategy. What are we going to do? It's almost 8 o'clock. If the Germans cross the border at daybreak, then we can assume that they'll be here any time. We're only 40 kilometers from the border. The couple thousand troops stationed in this part of the country will only slow them a little. Our troops will withdraw to the Azov line, maybe even further. If all the children were here, we'd stay put here at home. There probably won't be much fighting here, but—" Yes, but 2 of the family were in Schwehenangen with Aunt Hattie, 12-year-old Fritz and 3-year-old Trudy. 6-year-old Hanneke was in Hillegersburg, near Rotterdam, with Aunt Jo. They were farmed out to the family for a few days so they wouldn't be underfoot during the move. Father was supposed to pick them up tomorrow. "The Azov line will hold them back," said Father. "If not, then the Greb line will. It may stop them for only a little while, but it could stop them permanently. Then we would be separated from the others until the end of the war. Or shall we try to reach them now?" "Yes," said Mother. "I want to go to the children. Let's go right now, Everett, as soon as possible." "All right," said Father. "That's what we will do. Now, everybody listen and do exactly what I say. John, get the car ready and check it out to see if everything's in running order. Tricia, you fix some sandwiches. We'll eat in the car. Mother, pack only what's absolutely necessary. I'll help you after I get dressed. We've got to be on the road in half an hour." They scattered. John ran to the garage, then came running back for the car keys. He opened the garage doors and started the DKW. Even though he wasn't 16 yet, he knew how. When he went along on trips, sometimes his father would let him drive long stretches. The car chugged outside. John turned it around and got it ready for loading. He calculated the amount of gas in the tank with a measuring stick. The car didn't have a gauge, and filled it from a jerry can in the garage. Then he checked the tires. When he returned to the house to report that the car was ready, the radio announcer was giving warnings about German planes. Planes over Gorkum, planes over Utrecht, and over Rheinsberg. Parachute troops were over Westernaar and Katwijk. 3 planes shot down near Arnhem. John went storming upstairs. "Dad," he shouted. "Dad, they've already shot down 3 enemy planes. Isn't that great?" But Father only shoved a heavy suitcase into his hand. "Put it in the car," he said, "and then come right back. There's more. Put a jerry can of gas in the trunk, just in case." To get at the trunk, John had to climb into the DKW and fold the backrest of the back seat forward. Nemo jumped in behind him and climbed into the front seat, sitting expectantly with his nose to the window, as if to say, "Oh boy, we're going for a ride." He would be disappointed. Tricia came out carrying another suitcase and a bag of sandwiches. Mother brought coats and jackets and a strong box with all their papers and jewelry. Father locked up the house and tossed a portfolio of sketches into the car, his latest project which he couldn't bear to leave behind. Then he snapped a chain on Nemo and jogged away with him to the neighboring farmhouse. Meanwhile, John packed the trunk. He just managed to fit it all in. "You going to sit in front, Mom?" he asked, and she could tell by his eyes what he hoped the answer would be. "No," she said. "You sit with your father." They had no sooner taken their seats than Father was back again. "All set?" he asked. "Then let's go." They eased out of the yard. How peaceful the house looked. The surrounding apple trees looked like pink bouquets, and the birds chirped and warbled as if celebrating spring. Did they really have to leave all this behind? Was it possible that right now, somewhere not far away, soldiers were drawing a bead on each other? "Whoa!" A high-pitched voice sounded, and the car slammed to a stop. A little bow-legged old man stood in the driveway, blocking the way with outstretched arms. His almost toothless mouth broke into a big grin as he approached Father's window. Father cranked it down. The brown juice of chewing tobacco stained the creases in the old man's chin. "A fine one you turned out to be," he said, chuckling. "Drop in between 8 and 9 in the morning, you said, and here I catch you trying to duck out on me. You aren't already running scared from the Germans, are you, Everett?" "Not running," said Father, "but 3 of our children aren't home yet, Uncle Garrett. We can hardly leave them alone at a time like this, right?" When the old man nodded, Father continued, "Do me a favor and keep an eye on things here. You were going to work for me. We agreed on that, right? We'll come to an agreement on wages later. I'll give you some money now in case you need something. Who knows when we'll see each other again?" But Uncle Garrett refused to take anything. "It won't be long," he said, "and in a pinch I've got something put aside. You'll be back soon, don't worry. You'll get to your kids all right, but you won't outrun the Germans. Tonight you'll go to bed a Hollander, and tomorrow you'll wake up a German," he guffawed. "Have you so little hope, you old cynic?" Father asked, shaking his head sadly. "Little hope," echoed the old man. "No, I've got all kinds of hope. Hitler's bubble will burst, as sure as I'm standing here. First, he might conquer half the world, but then his bubble will burst. You can't build on oppression and lies, not as long as there's a God in heaven. It does my heart good to think how he'll cook his own goose. Well, you'd better step on it. They're getting closer. Drive safely, and God bless you. Goodbye." He shook Father's hand, curtsied comically to the others, and stood waving and smiling as the car drove off down the road. "That was Garrett, Grandfather's hired hand," Father explained. "Now he's going to work for us, and you can bet he'll take good care of our place while we're gone. He's always full of jokes, but you can count on him. He's an optimist with a difference, isn't he? He accepts the fact that we're going to be beaten, but he's already looking forward to ultimate victory. I wouldn't be surprised if he were right." Then he lapsed into silence and concentrated on the road. He stepped on the gas, and the DKW leaped ahead, pointing south.